Hi everyone, welcome to Game Theater. Today we are on the highlight reel / review of Ethan Carter.
The Vanishing of Ethan Carter.
The Vanishing of Ethan Carter. Thank you. I'm Rob. This is...
I'm Jess.
Christian.
And I'm Andrew.
Game Theater.
And without further ado, I guess, do you mind if we just go straight into the questions?
Absolutely.
All right. So, Ethan Carter had a kind of a non-linear plot to it. Can you say how it really used it or didn't use it to its advantage to get the story progressing?
With the story, I felt it was, because of it having many side quests and things you could do that weren't part of the main plot, and even with the main plot being something you could pretty much miss entirely if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
It was an option. You didn't have to go through all of these ghost parts where you see how a part of the family dies. It was really interesting, and I think it was a really cool idea that you could completely skip the entire story and get to the end, and the ending would still mean something either way. I think that it adds more by being a part of all of those smaller parts, but it's interesting to think of how you can go through this game and not try to be a part of any of the story elements.
It's really neat that there's no order to anything. You can kind of just go at it any way you want, and it speaks to that. It speaks to the fact that the game is less focused on the importance of story, but more an experience of you can miss it and it's still there. And there was a freedom in that they weren't railing you on a path. You could just kind of wander and experience the story any way you wanted. And I liked the mechanic at the end where they did still make it mandatory that you did experience the entirety of the game, but they did it in a way that made playing every story not a chore. Yeah. They aided on the player's ability to just get there quick and do them and come back and not really miss too much of where you were.
So you did get to play a lot of them, so you got to see a lot of this crazy imagery and other really interesting...
And metaphor.
Yeah, lots of metaphors and just this crazy imagination of the character Ethan. Can you guys discuss how they were related to the story, and did it give you more or kind of a bigger look into what was going on? Did it help you expect what was going to happen at the end of it?
Well, I'll start because I didn't predict the ending, unlike someone here. And maybe I'm less intuitive. But I found the side stories, throughout the game you encounter little notes written by Ethan, stories that then take form in physical reality that you...
Like the Spaceman?
Yeah, so you encounter them as a reality, and then you learn that it was just an imagining of Ethan.
Yeah.
And while I don't think those contributed to the overall story, they really gave us insight into what it was like Ethan's growing up and his character development. You got to see a lot of nice interactions of how Ethan grew up and his relationship to his mother or his brother and his uncle, whether or not they respected the fact that he wrote stories, and it was just a neat little side note that was I appreciate that it was voice acted.
I found that those parts, despite being or appearing at first as side things, they're not the most important parts, were after the weird parts happened. For example, the Spaceman. It ended up being more firmly rooted in reality than the rest of the game or the main story, because they related to the actual events. And at the end of the game, of course, spoilers for people who haven't watched it yet, and of course, at the end you find out that all of this has been a story up until that point, meaning that none of it has happened, and that it's all been just part of Ethan's imagination. Whereas there were points where after going through one of Ethan's stories, for example, the Spaceman, you'd have dialogue happening off-screen with him and his brother, and those were the parts that were actually rooted in reality. So those were the true events of the game, rather than the story that was happening around us in the main plot.
Speaking of all of these different side quests, I wanted to ask you what you thought the genre of this game was. Because in our Let's Play, we kind of went through a whole bunch of different ones.
Yeah.
Lovecraftian, like
sci-fi,
mystery.
kind of like supernatural with the witch.
Yeah, film noir. What do you think the genre of this game is, and can it be classified?
Well, I think very simply, it's a mystery game because
mystery?
you work through it the entirety to discover the answer. The big question of Vanishing Ethan Carter, where did he go? And you encounter all these other mysteries on the side. Who is this astronaut, and what is this witch hut out in the forest? And you understand
Who is the sleeper?
They all become yes. Big question of the game is who is the sleeper and what does he want? All the side stories, all the extra mysteries are revealed to be stories of Ethan's, and it almost makes sense in the end that the biggest mystery of all was his greatest story. So I would classify this as a mystery game, but the way it goes about it is very unique, and it's not something that I would classify to a genre because it's, like I said, it's not really story emphasized, and it's more experience or like emphasized, and that is not something I'm used to seeing in video games. So
Yeah, I would agree. I would say it would be at heart a mystery game, but not necessarily as defined as just being a mystery game, because it does go off into different genres for fun, and like in Ethan's different stories, of course, they go through different things.
Yeah.
And even at points kind of get into horror.
Yeah, the zombie in the cave.
Return? Whoa, what? What is that? What? Go look.
what? There's a man.
It's a person.
There's a person. You should go see it.
Are you insane?
It might not be a bad person.
Everyone we've seen so far is trying to kill somebody.
Yeah, but now he's gone. Wait, he's not. Oh. That was startling.
You want to go find him again?
I don't know. I didn't know what was happening. Yeah.
That was a rush.
And so I think that the point isn't necessarily that it needs to be defined as a thing. I would, of course, say that at its base it would be a mystery game.
Cool.
But I think that it is, like Christian said, the most important part is just the experience you get from that.
From playing the game
Yes.
itself.
So, because this is like a much more there's a lot more voice acting, there's a lot more dialogue between characters and stuff. How was the character development between characters with like Ethan and Paul Prospero and everyone else? How was that to the game, and how did it contribute to the story?
I found that many of the characters didn't really change throughout the story. A lot of the characters would get to a point where they would become controlled by the sleeper or whatever it was, whatever was in their minds, and they would then promptly die or kill another character who would also be influenced by that sleeper.
Yeah.
And then the only changes would happen in characters who would help Ethan. The grandfather, I think, would be the character who changed the most, because he started out being he never ended up being... Yeah, he was very helpful. He was the first character to help someone out, help him out in the beginning of the game that we saw.
Yeah.
And at the end of the game, he wasn't trying to stop Ethan from waking the sleeper, but he was trying to stop the events of the story from happening. And so it wasn't much... There wasn't a lot of development, I found, in the characters. Ethan didn't really change by the end. No one...
Well, he died.
Physical changes aside from mental, emotional changes, he never grew as a character. I guess he would have accepted death at the end, which would be one change, but I didn't think there was that much.
What about Paul?
I have some stuff to say about Paul, but first I'll answer your question really quick.
Thank you.
There was no, that's totally fair, because I do want to talk about Paul.
Paul's a part of it.
In terms of character development, I guess I agree with Andrew. There wasn't a lot of change among the characters, but I think the development that existed in the game was discovery.
Yeah.
It's not so much that the character changed, but I didn't know anything about the character, and it was revealed to me bit by bit. In the voice acting, I much appreciated the voice acting because there was a lot of text in the game, and they overrode, I didn't have to do as much reading as I might have because they read it to me.
Yeah.
Which was a much smoother way of introducing all these very wordy bits.
Yeah.
And also, not so much in the main story, but in the side missions, there was some emotional, again, not development, but realization in characters, specifically the dialogue between Ethan and his mother, and her tired frustration in her voice, but the love kind of behind that, where she just wants Ethan to clean up after himself, and that really gives you a sense of the mother that is fed up and overworked, but still very much a loving mother.
Yeah.
Paul Prospero, though, is an interesting character. Paul Prospero is the character that you play as a gamer, and it is a first-person view, so you never see Paul, and you very, very rarely hear him speak. And whenever he spoke, I was completely ejected from the game. I did not like the fact that he had a voice, because the first-person perspective really let me immerse myself entirely in the game. I forgot half the time that Paul Prospero existed. I thought I was the protagonist, me, Christian Lang, was the protagonist in the game, and then all of a sudden, the body I was controlling would speak a voice that wasn't my own, and it was very jolting for me to realize that I wasn't really in control.
I wasn't a big fan of Paul as a character because I felt he distracted from the story.
Interesting.
And just removed your association with the character Ethan, and it kind of tried to get you to associate with this character that ended up not being of importance so in the end, because the only thing he was there for, he technically doesn't do anything. He just sort of experiences these events, and then at the end wakes up Ethan. And his importance is more of just a metaphor for just like realizing
he was a vehicle to see the story, and you know, my car doesn't need to talk to me to get me places.
And I can agree with that. I feel as though we could have been introduced to the idea that this is a person, or even just not been introduced to the game at all as this being a character you're playing, but more just being yourself experiencing this, and I think it would have been a bit more effective.
Especially since there's such an emphasis on this is your experience, this is you get to explore the world, and we're not going to try and tell you which way to go. You know, feel free, explore, be yourself, kind of a thing. And yet they impose that voice on me every now and again, which is so infrequent that I would forget in between his bits of dialogue that he even existed.
If it was more frequent, would that have helped?
It might have helped develop as a character, but I still feel that would have taken me out of that.
I feel his character could have been as easily replaced by just a narrator.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because that's what he did for the entire story, was just narrate the events.
Well, so would you say that maybe a silent protagonist would have been more preferred?
I think it would have just been that little extra bit to help facilitate the immersion of the player. First person is really good for that because you don't have to pretend you're someone else. They are your own eyes.
So maybe that's why the Call of Duty franchise is
doing so well.
Successful. Let's talk about the twist ending. And do you think that it was justified and actually led up to?
Maybe you want to, because I know you had some pretty
yeah.
strong opinions on this ending.
You were able to call it.
I guessed the ending. I don't expect.
You do that a lot, though.
Yeah, it's what I was getting to.
It's
I know a lot of stories, so I'm able to piece together stories sometimes better than others. So it's not saying that this is a predictable ending, as much as it was. It felt as though the events up until that point didn't matter as much as they should have. So there was a lot of importance put on, the family keeps dying off every single time you find these like ghosts of the past, and
the bodies.
you'll find bodies, and so you start to care about these characters that then you find out didn't die, and everything you had been doing didn't really affect the ending. So everything up until that point didn't do anything. So I liked the ending, but I felt that by having this twist where, yes, this didn't happen, this is all just another story, they were kind of pulling the rug out from under us and saying, well, you didn't see that coming. And we couldn't have really that easily because there wasn't a lot of hints at it.
Right.
I was more digging to try and see where the end would go. That's how I ended up figuring it out.
Although I would say the fact that Ethan's stories come alive before you, like, we thought it was something paranormal, but it sort of hints that you're in the story, right? Because his stories are coming alive around you, so you might as well, like...
It only makes sense that you're one more story.
Yeah.
It's one of those endings where the more I think about it after the fact, the more I go, how did I not see this coming?
Yeah.
But I agree, it is a complete reversal of everything that you thought you understood about the characters in the game up until that point, which I thought was a powerful tool in so much as it flipped everything on your head. The whole game you're led to believe that the Ethan's family is very aggressive and hateful towards him. They're literally out to kill him, and he's on the run, he's all alone. And then you find out in the end that they were trying to save him from an accident they started themselves.
Yeah.
But it was just that whole, they really did love him kind of it was a complete flip, and I see that it worked for me, and I don't know if it worked for you because you had nothing to base that flip on, so you didn't really feel connected to characters you no longer knew.
So when you say that having this twist ending kind of took you out of it?
It woke. I wouldn't say it took me out of it so much as it woke me up to it.
Woke you up?
As deep as I could, because Ethan was asleep. But it was just, it really. I was convinced that the paranormal world I was in was reality, and then there is a real world. You don't have to accept fantasy. There is a reality here, and it's a lot darker than you thought it was, and it's a lot sadder than you thought it was. Which is only perpetuated by the fact that Ethan's family is not cruel, because they are nice, and I was almost, vindicated. It's like, I'm glad, I felt less bad about everyone dying because they were so evil, and then to find out that they were really good all along, and they're not even the ones that suffered.
Died.
It got a little emotional. I mean, I'm not the most emotional player, but I can understand how this story is a touching one.
Well, and it relates, right? Like, in video games, you play in paranormal worlds that exist, but as soon as you turn off the video game,
you go back to real life, and this real life was you got snapped back within the context of the game.
Yeah.
All right. I want to get into some more technical aspects now. What do you guys think of the clues system, like with the kind of like the word jumbles that led you to things, and also like with the making the progression of the mysteries, like when you had to look at the ghosts,
the
chronological sequences. What do you guys think of that?
Well, in terms of guidance mechanics, like you talk about the words, which is a jumble of words that help kind of a hot and cold location system. There's not a lot of game instruction on that, so it was very trial and error at first, but quickly became second nature. The mechanics stayed the same throughout the game, and once you got the hang of it, nothing changed on you, which made the game less about puzzles and more about just getting to that next story reveal. The chronology puzzle mechanic as well, kind of, you got into the rhythm of just understanding it, and as a puzzle mechanic, I feel it lacked a little bit in that it was something you could solve with brute force if you didn't feel like thinking very hard.
Just by trying.
You could. Well, there's only so many. There's 5. The most I think ever was 5 sequences, and you just had to figure out their order. And sometimes it was easy to predict just because they often formed a straight line from the dead body, the final clue back to the first clue, and the way they appeared. But I feel that they changed up just enough to keep you guessing from time to time. Sometimes we thought we just knew, and then it was wrong.
Yeah. With the whole clues system, I think it was interesting. Although I wasn't a big fan of having there be a main character, I think it was cool to see how the main character was thinking. And although I think those points could have been voice acted, and it would have made it a little bit...
Oh, the disembodied thinking.
The disembodied voice. It would have made it seem like there was more of a character rather than just having a narrator.
Interesting, that's really cool.
Feature that would pop up every once in a while when you entered a new area. This would have made it a bit easier to connect to the character of Paul Prospero because you would have had him there more often.
Discussing,
So if it wasn't just him thinking, oh, a gun, does this mean it was fired? Was it left here by someone? Instead, you would hear him saying these to himself. Or at least his thoughts, so that it would be more inclusive to that, have the character be more inclusive in the story. And I found that as playing, the gameplay-wise, the clues system was really interesting because when I didn't know how to use it at first, it was just, oh, this is weird looking, and then later on we realized that if you moved it around, it would get smaller or bigger, and then it would lead you to a certain place. And I found, once we figured that out, it was kind of like an, oh, I see moment, and it was really cool to have discovered that.
It's not a very hand-holding game, and there's a great sense of satisfaction in doing that.
So, I was going to add on to this. Are you glad that there were no tutorials that were that things weren't spoon-fed to you? Because, this is both the games we played on Game Theory, none of this, we didn't have tutorials, whereas most mainstream games will introduce you to new mechanics and tell you how to do it from the get-go. Are you glad that you had to kind of discover it yourself?
Well, I feel as though besides that one mechanic, there weren't that many things that were trying...
that you needed to discover.
There wasn't anything new control-wise. The controls were generally...
Well, you had to know the controls.
The controls were generally the same as a normal computer game. Me being a more experienced computer game player, it was easy for me to know, I assume left shift is run, and then I tried it and it was.
Yeah.
Moving was W, A, S, and D keys on the keyboard.
Yeah.
Knowing basically that holding left or right click will do something in the game, and it didn't really do anything new.
Yeah.
That was mostly the more innovative part, was the knowing that if you're pointing somewhere and you're looking for a clue, it will get smaller or bigger in order to help point you in the right direction.
The lack of game instruction, even in terms of where to go next, it just sort of engendered the idea of exploration. Like, you gotta keep trying at it. And like, that's how we discovered the hot, cold, words expanding, words narrowing down, and that meant focus, which, why would I ever link those two? It was just something you had to keep, like, trying until something happened, which is what the game wants you to do. It wants you to explore everything and just test it, and they're not going to tell you where to go or how to do it.
What was the flow of the game like? How did the like, with going from story to story from Ethan and seeing all these, like, kind of like wacky and very different genres, how did it kind of like contribute to the flow of the game? Was it smoother or was it choppier?
I almost want to say on intuition that it was quite a smooth game, because there was no this zone then the next zone. It was just
because it was very seamless, right?
However, there is two arguments against that. At the very end, they cut you right out of it to make sure you've experienced everything, and that is a very disjointed moment in the game.
Yeah.
But also all the side quests where they just take you out of the world, literally. At one point, you enter a spaceship that blasts you off into outer space.
Yeah.
And those were very... They eject you from the world of the game, and you just kind of sit back and watch this wild ride. But that was enjoyable. I wouldn't necessarily say that's a bad quality of the game, but it did arguably break up the flow of the gameplay.
So it did make it a bit choppier.
Yes, but in a way that I was able to enjoy.
Okay.
Whereas I would say, I'd put it a bit differently, where I think that with the side parts, for example, Spaceman, it starts off as, there's some strange, weird thing in the middle of this forest, I'm going to touch it, and I do, suddenly a spaceman appears. And so it kind of draws you into this new story. And all of them sort of had this point where they would let you go and do this new thing, but it wasn't just like, you press a button, suddenly you're in space. It would lead into it. You had to chase this man around the woods until you found that he went into this pod. Then you go into the pod, and then it pulls you out into this new genre. Yeah. So it kind of leads you into it, which I think helps with the transition. But then after it finishes, it drops you back in the world, and that's where I think it gets disconnected. But I think that's intentional.
And especially like with the Spaceman, especially like you saw how it got to it when you saw the magazine. You're like, this is what we just experienced.
That makes perfect sense. I didn't think about it that way. The way they introduce each moment, I agree that it's thing at the end. The way they do introduce it, though, is seamless to the point where we weren't sure if it was the actual game or not.
Yeah.
When you were chasing the Spaceman, like, you thought, now there's just a new character we get to meet, and then it turns out that it was irrelevant.
And, for example, when we were in the caves and we found that dead guy walking around with a lantern, we, at that time, were convinced that was part of the game, and then it ended up not being. Or at least
that was the only
story.
Time you sort of died.
Yeah.
It
was only
arguable death.
Yeah. What were you guys' ultimate thought on the voice acting? Andrew, I remember you had the comment with Paul Prospero reminding you a lot of Michael Keaton from Birdman.
What do you think of the voice acting?
It reminds me of Michael Keaton from Birdman.
Well, what do you guys think? Do you think the voice acting in this game hindered or helped the game ultimately?
I think it helped. They were well casted. All the voices seemed very appropriate and gave good emotion to the characters they were portraying. And even though I didn't like Paul Prospero, the voice they chose for him, the gruff, kind of smoky detective voice, was very well suited.
Very film noir.
Very well suited. That gave volumes to that character. I just didn't like the character.
So even though you didn't like how the character had a voice because it took you out of kind of the immersion of the game, you can acknowledge that it was well cast and suited the character well.
All the choices they made, I feel, served the game well.
That's very good. All right.
I can agree with that. It's the characters' voices seem to fit their character type and what they felt like, and they did a good job portraying the emotions that the characters were portraying. and it didn't really bring me out of the game in any way. Even Paul Prospero was fine, despite his disembodied voice not really affecting anything. I feel like it still worked well with creating the mood of the world and the game. But yeah, no, it generally didn't pull me out of it at all.
Do you think voice acting in video games is important to world building? Like, specifically in this game, I think having the voices there really pulled you in. Do you think this is something more games should use? I mean...
Well, I can... in some cases, voice acting isn't necessarily the be-all and end-all. No. But when done well, it can definitely add layers to the emotional development of characters, because you get that so much more from text. In terms of immersion, voice acting, we get this in real life, at least I do, when you kind of get thrown for a loop for a second if a voice doesn't match up with the voice you heard in your head when you looked at them. And that's where good casting comes in, where if a voice just clicks with the face they've designed, then instantly that character becomes alive. That's someone you could see on the street. In your imagination, they become someone identifiable. Yeah. So I think it's like a good tool to make your characters more real.
Yeah, because, of course, the first thing about a video game, the biggest focus should be on the mechanics and being played well, but having a good voice cast certainly doesn't hinder it.
Brings it to that next level.
Yeah. I find that I've played a lot of games where there isn't any voice acting, and I've played a lot of games where there are voice acting, and I find that it can be useful, but only if you want it to be, and it can be useful without voice acting. So not everything needs voice acting. There are tons of games I've played where there's only music. And where music tells the story instead. For Brothers had voice acting, but it wasn't
barely.
The voice acting wasn't
a recognizable language.
A language. It was just to help create the idea of their talking being an actual language.
Yeah.
So it can be used in a lot of different ways, or not used at all, and I think that either way is really
either is effective.
Because they do still have the text at the bottom. Plus, if somebody is unfortunately deaf, or if somebody doesn't want to listen to the music in the game and just listen to their own personal music, then they can still be immersed in the game by reading what is going on.
That's true.
All right. Well, can you guys tell me about the technical elements? What did you think of the graphics or soundscape?
Yes, let's talk about the graphics.
Let's talk about the graphics.
Do you want to start? Because I might just go on and on.
I'll be pretty concise so that you can go on. My thoughts basically were with the special... do you remember what the name of the...
Photogrammetry.
Photogrammetry, with them taking multiple pictures of a single object in an actual setting like that, and then rendering that so that it's in the game.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool, and I could really tell they had put a lot of care into creating the world, and that it really did help bring us into this game world and being able to see things that looked real and were recognizable to us instead of it being like a big fantasy world, whereas you guys saw trolls and ogres and giants.
Yeah.
We just saw real life, but with small...
Very real life.
With realistic settings, with supernatural elements involved in those settings.
Like the Kraken.
So I think they really did help, and they really brought another element to the world, making it look very realistic. And just it didn't look like reality. I didn't look at it and go, is this just a picture? But it created a good enough idea of this world that we knew, oh, well, this is probably our reality.
Which made the supernatural elements,
which made the supernatural elements stick out more.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll try and keep it short.
We'll cut it easy.
It was a very beautiful game, and that there's no denying that. It was a lot of lake scenes. It was a mountainous valley, and having grown up on the lake, I love me a good sunset over the water, and this game, spot on. The photorealism, the photogrammetry, was an amazing tool because a feature of that is that there's a lot less repetition of images. So, a fence, it's not always the same fence. Every post is a little different because it was taken from a real fence image. And that diversity in the world, in the graphics, made the world so much more natural, which is why it felt more realistic to me. Well, I agree, it didn't look real. I wasn't mistaken. I didn't think I walked outside and oh my goodness. But it was so much more believable because those tiny little details everything was unique. And that juxtaposed against the supernatural elements really well, because all these absurd things are happening, and yet we have something to ground us that is more natural, more relatable, more visually akin to what I'm used to seeing in real life. And I could tirelessly walk around and stare at rocks, because no two rocks are quite the same. It was just a very relaxing environment to be in, especially with the sound they used. The music I found very calming, with a non-linear story where you could end up wandering for an hour or two. It's nice to be able to just not feel any anxiety at not progressing to the next task,
Right,
to be
yeah.
totally comfortable in that, just exploring and looking around, and there's something nice to see and some nice sounds to listen to. They also did have a soundtrack that was very tense and made you feel almost in danger, which was well used at times, but it had a tendency of playing randomly while we were walking around in the scenic forests, which made me very uncomfortable. I was unsure what I was supposed to be doing. I felt the need to run away, even though I was just exploring the woods and looking for bunnies and stuff like that.
Looking for bunnies.
Did you ever find any?
I did not find any bunnies.
We heard some loons.
Oh yes,
The loons.
Yeah, very very good nature sound effects. They just a good eye and ear for detail in really bringing that world into a natural, realistic setting.
I know how much you love it. What do you think about the skybox?
Dude, the skybox was seamless. The skybox being, the horizon, the skyline, and it was just so seamlessly blended into the background. You couldn't see where it clipped over anything. It was just, it was good. It was really good.
Good.
Just makes you all jittery inside.
It makes me warm inside.
That's good.
Good job, astronauts.
So, in terms of interaction, you guys were playing the game kind of together, whereas this was very much more of a single-player game. So, when you guys were playing together, you kind of collaborate a bit, did that change the experience at all for you? Because you both played single-player games before.
Yes.
So, how
Yes, I
did
have.
playing with each other kind of change the experience, I guess?
In terms of playing The Vanishing of Ethan Carter, very much a game you want to get immersed into. It's all about the experience, and you are playing a detective. I thought it was very nice to have a partner in crime, like a detective buddy to consult on puzzles. If something I didn't see, I had an extra set of eyes and ears and nose to the grindstone helping me out. So if there was something I couldn't quite understand or solve, I had Andrew, my partner, to come take over for me and point me in the right direction. And I like to think vice versa. I was able to help sometimes. Yeah. And it was also really great in terms of, because there's not a lot of dialogue from the main character, I'm left to voice a lot of my own opinions and make my own conclusions. And playing by myself, I feel like I might not have voiced them, but playing with a partner made it so much easier and more natural to start talking about them out loud, which...
And because we were recording.
Oh, that as well.
Yeah.
It was a nice way to explore ideas and really kind of test my theories in the game.
Cool.
Yeah, playing single-player games on your own is more personal. Like I'd said, when I played, other games, I have my own opinions, and having someone else with me can kind of alter my opinions. So it'll make me think of things deeper or in a different way. Whereas, for example, I could think, Ethan must be running away from this thing, and I think it's this, and Christian can say, oh, well, maybe it's this, and then I could say, oh, no, that makes more sense. And so being with another person and being able to bounce ideas off of each other can help generate more ideas. So being on your own, you can only think so much, but being with another person, it kind of adds to what you're able to think about, and it gives you more to expand upon. And so there were points where you would kind of sit back and be like, well, it's your plan, you get to decide what you're doing.
I don't want to...
So you'd push me more, but other times you would be like, why don't we try this? And
brain. I didn't want to mind control but I like throwing back and forth theories about the witch and stuff like that, and we had this big discussion. Actually, Jess got in on the meaning of all the stories Ethan wrote and how each one is a personal story about something that happened to his family.
Well, yeah, 'cause the witch was his mom, and the spaceman was his uncle, or something weird like that. And
Just these cool theories that being a game about a detective deducing his own, kind of theories, that we got to do that ourselves was even more like the next level of immersion, where I was doing it in real life about the game while the game was doing it about itself.
which is why I found that the parts where the narration happened with Paul Prospero pulled me out was because we had already been doing it on our own.
Okay.
We didn't need him.
Yeah,
Oh.
we were good enough without him.
We make a great detective team.
Yeah.
So, what was kind of like the moral of like the story of this game? What did you kind of like take from this game?
More specifically, what do you think the game designers were trying to say with it?
What was like their message?
Yeah. I think the Vanishing of Ethan Carter didn't really have necessarily a message or a theme. Like there was no phrase they want you to have memorized by the end of it. And it was, we keep saying it's all about the experience, and what they wanted you to experience was, or the experience I left with at the end of it with that twist ending was a sense of loss and like regret you'll never be able to make up for. I instantly switched perspectives from being on Ethan's side to his family side when Ethan turns out to be the one dying and his family is surviving him, and it was all the time they'll never have to make up for the horrible things that they did. Because the whole game, Ethan thinks his family's trying to kill him. That's his dying thoughts, his dying imagination is him understanding that his family...
They don't support my stories.
Is very much against him.
Yeah.
And to watch them fruitlessly try to save him was just, they'll never be able to atone for the horrible thing, like the way he felt about them.
Yeah.
And it was too bad that he had to die not knowing that they did love him.
Would you say it was a cathartic experience? Like, in the way we talk about theater, did you feel all this pity and fear in the game, and then when you left, you...
No, the exact opposite. Because, I was coming to terms with an understanding, okay, they're trying to kill him. I don't know why they're trying to kill him. I didn't have justification. But when it turned out that they didn't, they just, they were frustrated. They were mean to him. They picked on him. But when it came down to it, they did love him, and then they still couldn't save him. It was that cutoff of I wanted something to happen next. I wanted them to at least maybe find the body and come to terms with the fact that he's dead, but they never even get to him.
There's no resolution.
Yeah, the game ends with a fruitless effort that we know is never gonna triumph, and it's just heartbreaking to see that.
I had not a lot of emotional connection to the ending that much, mostly because I got pulled out of it because of the story that I had led to believe was going to be the story of the game wasn't
real.
It was one of those.
Yeah. And so it kind of pulled me out. It was like, okay, and
all a
on the topic of morals,
yeah,
it was kind of the whole, it was all a dream trope that's common in a lot of movies and television shows and even video games now. But on the topic of morals, I would agree. I think it was kind of enjoying what you have and learning to like the things that you have in your life. So it was kind of a moral for the family rather than for Ethan, where Ethan's moral would be that just because someone's not giving you the attention you want doesn't mean they're
it doesn't mean
trying
they're
to
a demon
trying
to murder you.
Well, it doesn't mean they're bad, but it also
He was a kid.
But also for the family, where it's learning to accept the things you have and know that they are there and that they can be gone at some point.
Yeah.
Other than that, I didn't see too much more of a moral than, or at least
Well, that's the big one.
I can't pull any other things out of.
But
that's definitely a theme.
Because of the fact that we didn't play as any of these characters and it was just something presented in passing, it felt less like a lesson they were trying to teach me and more just an observation and derive this feeling from it. Like, you saw it, but we're not trying to tell you anything about it.
Yeah. It felt less like a moral than it was just, this is a theme.
Something that happened.
And you can associate with this, but it isn't me trying to say, oh, you should brush your teeth because it will be healthy. It's saying, oh, these people brushed their teeth and they are healthy.
Yeah. There was no, they all lived happily ever after, nor was there, they all regretted their sins. Like it was just, it just ended.
It wasn't a happy ending.
No.
It was not a happy ending at all.
But nor was it like a sad ending that had resolution. It was just presented to us.
It was just an ending.
Yeah.
Like a movie almost.
Yeah.
So where would you place this game in terms of video games? I mean, we've talked about genre and how it's a mystery game, but with a lack of a theme and a lack of a moral, it's not... What do you think the game designers were trying to do? Just make a sandbox game?
Well, as an experience game with a, it's not driven by mechanic. It's not a heavy skill required game. It kind of opens the doors to a lot of, different types of gamers. People that wouldn't necessarily be interested in commercialized games might be interested in something that's a little easier for them to get into and less punishing. If there's no punishment in this game at all. Anything is acceptable. There's no way to lose.
Yeah.
So it's very accepting for new players. And I want to talk about, I'll let you answer first, but I want to talk about the designers' hopes for this game when they were making it, and why I think that's important to the game world.
Andrew?
I've played games similar to this, ones that have even less gameplay than this, that are just meant to be a story experience, that it's people online have even referred to as walking simulators, which
cool.
Is sort of to be the idea of you walk around in this world and you experience things, and then you finish the game and then you go home, and you can think about it, or you can just kind of let it wash off your back, and so that's kind of what I would think of that kind of game, and that's where I think it fits in. Is a lot of independent games have been using this sort of style of walking around. There's a game called Gone Home, which you walk around a house and you try to piece together where the family has gone of this character. And so you can, it's kind of experiencing things by finding out a story just through walking around.
Right.
And so it's not necessarily gameplay heavy. Some games like these don't even have puzzles like this game did. I know of one that you can get through the game in less than 30 minutes if you wish, but the game can be extended to around 3 hours without it, because you can spend time just walking and exploring.
Cool.
So yeah, I think it would be
a walking simulation.
A walking simulation.
That's super cool.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. It's kind of like a walking simulator. There's nothing really revolutionary in this game, but what I think is important and deserves more attention, something, I don't know if it's novel, but definitely undervalued, is the goals in which the designers had when they were making this game. They wanted to make something that went back to their roots as buddies. It was a team of 5 guys that back with their first company, and they wanted to get back to those days, in the studio, designing their own games, just the 5 of them, which speaks to the commercialization and commodification of the video game industry, and they wanted to escape that and not make a story that a company could sell, but they wanted to make a game that they wanted to make, that they would enjoy making. And I think
be pretty and
more,
cool.
So you think it was just nice from a personal standard because they were able to make the kind of game they wanted to make.
And I think that kind of creativity should be fostered in the gaming community, because that would just open up, it would diversify the types of games we were able to play, and as a result, the type of gamers that participate in gaming, because there would be games for them, and people would be able to really follow their passions instead of the next blockbuster.
So are you saying that because we're in kind of like a golden age of indie gaming right now, where anyone can make their own game and put it out, like thank you to Steam and other
platforms which support
do you think that this game was even able to happen because we're in such a good spot with indie games right now?
I guess so. Yeah, that there are companies willing to support independent developers. That it fosters this, but I think more. I wish more major companies would pick up this mantle and support their development teams and their design teams in creating games that they were truly passionate about, instead of the next in a series or something that they think they know will sell, quote unquote.
Yes, to make an interesting story and not just something that can span sequel after sequel.
Mm-hmm. And not even interesting story, just interesting game. Like when we did the live stream of Goatsim, that was just made because they thought it was fun, right? And that game is just fun. So it's really interesting that this game, from a different angle, is made because you want to, instead of because they asked.
Andrew, do you have anything?
Any thoughts on that? Or?
Yeah. I think that the gaming community being more open to creating these types of games where people are allowed to just do a thing they want to do brings gaming into the theater and movie world and TV world, because it's starting to become a type of media that can be experimented with more. Whereas before it was only treated as a thing that children would play with, and now it's starting to be regarded as something more important than that.
Awesome.
I really wish we could have ended on that, but I have one more question.
Well, we can.
Well, she'll edit it around. Ask the question.
What did you guys think of the first-person perspective? Like most games, now they seem to be going with the first-person POV. Do you think this game would have done better with perhaps a third-person point of view, or maybe like a sky view or anything else, or do you think first-person was the best way to go?
You said that the first person was really immersive, but do you think third person would have helped Paul Prospero be a character for you?
I think that if a third person view of the world, so from over the shoulder or from behind the character of Paul Prospero was used, they would have had to make the character much more a part of the game, or else it would have completely failed. And I feel that because they did it in first person, it was easier to forget about Paul Prospero, making it easier to just be, oh, I'm the one who's walking around this world instead of this character.
Yeah.
But if it was, you see Paul Prospero walking around this world, he would have had to speak much more often, even have things that he would do, like maybe he'd scratch his ear, and that would be something he'd have to be developed as a person instead of just being this character that you're controlling walking around this place, which is a thing that happens a lot in games with third-person views.
Yeah.
You have to have a character that is completely established before you can care about that character. Right. Otherwise, it's just a hollow shell.
I agree. If you did it in third person, it would create Paul Prospero as someone we could see and interact with, but that would add, I hesitate to use the word barrier, but another lens, at least, that I would have to get through to get to the story. Because I would have to operate as a player through Paul, and then through him operate into the game. And without, in the first-person perspective, Paul was removed from the equation, and it was just me in the game. And I didn't have to confer my thoughts and my actions through another player, through another character.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that since it was so heavily focused on experience, which would require a high level of immersion, the choice of first person really aided in that.
Cool.
Do you guys have anything else you'd like to add on about the game?
No, I think we covered a lot.
Yeah.
Did you have any extra questions?
Anything else?
No, I asked my good genre question.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody, for watching. This has been our reel of the Vanishing of Ethan Carter for Game Theater. Thank you so much for watching.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Thank you.
And see you.